Sometimes your layer mask and Affinity aren't quite giving you the results you expect. And what's the difference between a layer mask and a clipping mask? What about container layers? Do you need to worry about those? There are some little nuances when it comes to working with layer mask and Affinity, and if you get those wrong or you don't understand them, they can make a big difference. So I'm going to get you straightened out in this video with all the little things you need to pay attention to, and hopefully that's going to save you from a lot of future headaches. Okay, let's dive right in. On this channel, I have another popular video all about selections and masking where I go deeply into those concepts. So if you're new to these concepts or you need a refresher, you can check out that video. But in this video, I'm going to talk about a few specific things that can still confuse people when it comes to understand why their mask isn't working the way they think it is. Specifically, I'm talking about things like groups, nested layers, clipping mask, container layers. So we're going to get into those things here so you really understand a few of these nuances and you're not confused again, because really understanding what you're going to be affecting with a mask is going to be crucial, because in a program like Affinity, it really is about controlling where you're going to make your edits. So first I'm going to start with a basic 3-minute primer to remind you of the fundamentals of how masking works, but of course if you feel good about that and you want to skip ahead, feel free to do so. Okay, let's start with some very basics. Often you're going to just make a selection to define an area you want to mask. So I'll just make a selection like this here, a rectangle in the center of this design here, and then I'm going to come down on my layers panel and choose this mask layer, and boom, just like that, it's made a selection, it's masked this area. I can hit Control D here on Windows, that would be Command D on Mac, to deselect, but it's still being applied. So now I have that selection that I made before, and now it's actively being applied as a mask. So a mask is really just another way you can think of a selection that's actively applied. And if we go on the mask layer here and we Alt-click to see it, again, that's on Windows. You can Option click on a mask layer on a Mac to do this, and then you're actually seeing the grayscale representation that is a mask. And that is the way a mask works. It is a luminosity-based selection, so grayscale values, white completely is going to let things show all the way through, black's going to hide things completely, and then in between are going to be all those grayscale values. Now I have another mask in here, so anytime you're selected on a mask like this and you want to no longer just view the mask, you can click out, and now that mask is still being applied, but we're no longer seeing the representation of that mask. Now, if I want to see this mask here, let me just turn off this mask we just created and turn on this other one here. And if I Alt-click in to see that, we can see that this is basically a grayscale ramp going from white here on the right all the way over to black on the left. And if we click out just to see that applied, we can see yes on the right here. Anything that's completely white is allowing the layer to show 100% through, but then as we step over towards that black side of the mask here, we're going to see nothing where it's completely black. And then in between, all these areas where we're partially seeing through. So that is how masks work. Grayscale values, so you can show hide different areas of the screen. And then you can use that mask to control areas where you want to make different edits. Right now we're just using this to show visibility, right? But we could also apply some sort of filter and then have the mask affect where that filter shows. So lots of different ways we can actually make use of a mask once we have one. So the idea of a mask as sort of grayscale values that actively apply a selection, that takes a little while to sink in for some people, but if you just play around, you're going to start to get this, and when you understand this, you're well on your way to having control of masks. There are other factors we're going to get into that are going to be important, but that grayscale idea of a mask is basically just another way to actively apply selection. So selections and masks are essentially the same thing. We just have the active version where you see the marching ants on screen, and then when it's actively applied as a mask, you're not seeing that selection, but it is being applied. So just to illustrate this, I'm going to actually come on this mask here, and on this mask layer, I'm going to control click to select it. So I don't have to actually be seeing the mask. I can just control click on the layer, and we see the marching ants now, so we know we do have something selected. Now, if I were to turn everything off here, and let me just come up to a totally new layer, with that selection I just made for my mask, I can pick any color here. So let's just take something here in this blue range, and then I'm going to hit Alt backspace to fill with that color, and we'll see that yes, that selection was just loading these luminosity values from our mask. So white completely loaded, partially loaded, less, not loaded at all once we get over to the black side of things. And if we look at that layer we created, we can see that yes, that's exactly what happened. I just pasted in this foreground color, or this background color here, I should say, And because I had that selection based on those luminosity values that we have in this layer mask here, that's why we're getting a result like this. Okay, so just driving home the point to you that a mask and a selection, they really are the same thing. So when we create a mask, we're saving a selection so that then we can use that selection to have only certain things show through, have filters only be applied certain places. So that is the idea of a mask. The first big factor that comes into play when talking about a mask and what that mask is going to affect is just the layer stacking order. So I have a simple example set up here where I have a blue circle, a green triangle, and a red rectangle here, and they all have some degree of overlap here. So I'm just going to take my selection tool here, and I'm going to grab out a selection area, something like this, and then I will go ahead and create a mask. So first I'm going to be selected here, so when I create a mask, it's going to appear above everything, and because it's above everything, we see that that mask is affecting the circle, the rectangle, and the triangle. They are all being affected by that mask. Now if I were to drag it down so it's below the circle now we see it is no longer affecting the circle. It is only affecting the layers below it. Same thing now if I drop it behind the triangle, it's not affecting the triangle. If I drop it below the rectangle, then it's not affecting anything. So that is the first rule to remember with regards to mask. Anything below the mask is going to be affected by the mask. So if it's atop all your layers, all the layers are going to be affected. Now there are ways this rule can be broken, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but first I got to point out one other thing. To create this mask, I had this circle layer active, and then I drew out a selection on screen, and when I clicked the mask button, it applied the mask above all the layers here, above the layer I was on, above the active layer. But let's try that again. So again, this is the active layer. Again, I'm going to drag out a selection, and again I'll come down and I'll hit this mask button. But watch, this time it got applied within the circle layer here, and we see it is only affecting the circle layer. So what just happened? Well, this happened because I actually played a little bit of a trick on you. When I had my recording paused, I went and changed a key setting that can change how a mask is initially applied. If I go up here under Edit, and then I come down to the Settings menu, so Edit Settings, and then if you come under the Assistant tab here, underneath here, there's this setting right here that says adding mask layer to selection. And I believe by default, it might be on add mask based on selection. I personally like to change this to add mask as a new layer. Now this is just a personal preference. You can set it to whatever you want, but this one setting here is going to change whether a mask gets applied above the active layer as a new layer or whether it gets applied to the active layer as a nested layer. And that is a big distinction. Let me just hit Control Z to undo the last keystrokes here. And now since I've changed that setting, if I go ahead and apply this again, now we'll see once again it gets applied above everything. So crucial setting, because as we can see, there's something different going on when it's nested. And that's the next point we're going to get to. We have this rule about where a mask applies to everything below it, but that's going to change if we start nesting masks. You can have nested layers. Now you can set that setting to whatever you want. It's not going to matter a lot in the long run because you can really easily switch between having a layer independent and having it attached to another layer. But I want you to be aware of that because if you don't understand that, then you might watch a tutorial and not quite understand what's going on or why somebody else is having something applied differently than what happens when you hit that mask button. So here's how you quickly switch between the two. So I'm just going to grab this mask and I'm going to drag it down on the layer, but not right over where we see it says use clipping mask if you are right over the thumbnail. Instead, you want to drag it to the right where it says place inside. Now we're going to talk in a couple minutes about this difference between clipping mask and place inside, but for now let's just go with this place inside option. And now we see we have this mask where it's nested within the circle and it's just applying to that layer. If I want to separate it again, I just grab it, drag it above it, and it's separated. So very easily you can go between the two, but if you don't understand why it's initially being applied one way or the other, that's where you have to go under that settings menu and find that setting I talked about. Now let me just turn this mask off for a second. You might be wondering, hey, can we use that place inside trick with other things besides just using a mask? Well, let's try to place this triangle within the circle. So let's drag it to the right, place inside. And hey, yeah, so that place inside trick will work with other objects, other layers as well. You can place any layer inside of another layer like this. And when you do so, the bounds of the parent object is going to control what's visible. So in this case, we drag the triangle within the circle. And so that circle is controlling what we can see of the triangle. So if I turn off the circle, we're not going to see anything of the triangle because, again, that circle is what is guiding and controlling what parts of the triangle we can see since it's nested within the circle. So parent layer, circle, and then the triangle is a nested child layer of that circle layer. Now you can continue to nest layers like this. So if I wanted to also put the rectangle layer within the circle, I could come up here and I could drag it over the circle where it says place inside, or I could just bump it up until I see it turn blue right below that and see it appear within that layer. And so you can nest as many wet layers as you want like this. And so then the circle is sort of serving as the mask and controlling everything that's visible within here. I could still go in here and I could do things like I could come in here and I could change the order of these. So we have the rectangle on top. Now we have the triangle on top, but it's all being governed by the outer bounds of that circle. Now, could I come up here and do something like actually nest the rectangle now within this triangle? So let's drag it right over top, place inside. Yes. So you can actually stack this even farther. So now we're nesting the triangle within the circle and the rectangle within the triangle. So you can stack these things however you like. And I can easily separate things again just by clicking on layers and dragging them out to their own spot here. So once again, I have them all back on separate layers. And so the takeaway with regards to the mask is just, yes, the masks do affect everything below that layer, but you can break that rule by doing things like nesting a mask within another layer. When you nest a mask like this, then suddenly the mask is only being applied to that layer. You have a distinct group, and so anything below that group, outside that group, it's not going to be affected. Let me drag that out again so it's above everything. Now you heard me using the word group there, and that's the other thing that's going to come into play, the next big factor, groups. We were sort of talking about nested objects, so sort of like acting like groups when you have objects nested together, but of course you can also create a group down here. So let me just select this circle here, and if I were to go ahead and add a group here, so use this group icon right here, group layers, and so now within this group I have just this circle here, and so then suddenly if I apply a mask within this group here, then we'll notice now, let me turn on that mask, that mask is going to affect everything within the group, but not things outside the group. So if I drag it above the group, it's affecting everything, but as soon as I put it down in that group, then it's affecting everything below it in the group. It's affecting the circle layer because they're both in the group and the circle is below it, but if I were to drag the mask below it in the circle group, then nothing in this group is being affected. Even though the mask is in this group, there's nothing else in the group below it. And because it's in the group, it's not affecting things outside the group, which if we close the group, we can see this triangle and this rectangle are outside the group. Now, if I were to take the triangle and I was going to grab that and pull it up into the group, now suddenly we can see that yes, this triangle is being affected by the mask there. So if I turn the mask on and on, we can see it's being affected. Circle is not being affected, but if I drag it below it in the group, now they're both being affected. So now within the group, the mask being above things, that still applies as a rule, but only within a group. The group's container sort of keeps that from spilling over to things outside the group, but within the group, things below the mask in the group are going to be affected by it. Anything above it would not be affected. So let me just right click on my group here and ungroup for now. So we got rid of that group, and so once again, everything below this being affected by this mask. So the mask is again affecting everything. Now, I said I would circle back to the difference between placing something inside. So I can place something inside here and we see how now this mask is clipped to the circle. But what if I take it and instead I use this and hold right over the thumbnail where it says use as a clipping mask. Now, it looks like the exact same thing has happened. And functionally this time it has, because this is a mask. But I don't want you to always think that this behavior of placing something inside versus using it as a clipping mask is going to be the same, because usually you're going to get a drastically different result. Let me just show you an example. So I'll take this back out and let's turn that off. Let's instead bring another shape on screen here. So I'm just going to drag out another rectangle. So we're just going to grab a rectangle, make it pretty thin like this. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. I want to actually go to my vector and drag out a vector shape. So let me just drag out this vector shape. We'll give it a different color just so we can recognize it as different from our other colors in here. So maybe something here. Let's make it more pink. There we go, so it stands out. Now if I take this rectangle and I drag it over, we know we can place it in the circle and it'll be contained by the circle. But instead, if we hold it over the thumbnail of the circle and go to use as clipping mask, now we'll see the opposite happens. Now this new rectangle is being used to clip the circle shape. So now we're only seeing parts of the circle that fit within the bounds of that rectangle shape. That rectangle shape is the clipping area. Now I could take that shape and I could move it around. So let me grab my move tool here. I could move around that shape And we're seeing lots of that blue circle when there's lots of blue circle within where the bounding shape currently is. But as we start to get to the edges of the circle, we notice we're only going to see parts of it that fit within the bounds of this clipping shape. Okay, so a lot of times you're going to get drastically different results if you hold something and you move it around and you place it inside versus using it as a clipping mask. So the clipping mask, again, acting as a mask of sorts, but these all work a little differently. And when you have a vector shape as a clipping mask like this, you can come in here and you can actually change the size of it on the fly. So if we made this rectangle really big, then suddenly we're showing more of the circle because more of it's going to fall within the shape. Again, move it around, do things like that. Now, what do you think would happen if we grabbed this green triangle and moved it up just below the clipping mask within this group here, nested below the circle? What do you think would happen? So let's move it up and see. So let's drag it up a little bit and we'll notice maybe not quite what you expected. Maybe you wanted to show here because that's the bounds of the clipping shape. However, remember, the clipping shape is controlling what parts of the circle we're going to see, but then the circle is the parent layer of the triangle, so the triangle is bound to the circle. So you can see how this relationship can get a little complicated. Now, anytime you have a clipping mask like this, you can just drag it up somewhere else to release it. You can also right-click not on the thumbnail itself, but right over here on the name itself, and then you can choose this release option. And once again, it's just going to move it up to the top of the stack. Now we still have the triangle here nested within the circle, so I can just move that out again. And now we have our shapes all separated again. So something else you can do is let's take these three bottom shapes, the blue circle, the green triangle, and the red rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and shift-click all of them, and then we're going to throw them together in a group. And so now if we had those all contained within a group here, now within that group, now I could take the rectangle itself and add it as a clipping mask to the entire group. And now what we have is a situation where the clipping mask is being applied to the group, not a specific layer. So now they're all contained within the clipping mask. So I think you're starting to see lots of different ways you can do this. And so you have to pay attention to not only layer order, but also are there groups, are there nested items coming into play? All these things can affect what you're seeing on screen. Now, a couple more quick things to mention. The first, if you ever have a clipping mask applied to a group like this, and then you were to come in here and you right-click and ungroup this, you notice I lose that clipping mask. So if you wanted to keep that layer that was the clipping mask, then what you want to first do is again do that release trick I showed you before, where you either drag it up or you come in here and you release it like this. Now I could come in here, now I can ungroup, and we're not going to lose that layer that we had before. Now the next thing I want to mention is if we come down here, there's also something called container layer. So we have groups, but then we also have container layer. I could create a new layer here, a container layer. It's going to have this symbol right here. I could have these three shapes here. I could bring them up here and place them inside that container layer. Now they're inside there. And then I could again take this rectangle and use it as a clipping mask, and functionally it's going to work the same way. And that's really what I want to say about container layers. I think in a prior version of Affinity, there may have been some functional differences between groups and container layers, but I cannot see right now any functional difference that you really get from using a container layer. So I think it's really kind of an artifact where they're not really any different with groups and how they behave like this. So just use groups, don't worry about container layers. Again, if you find something different, you can post it down below. I'm happy to learn, but I try it again and again, and from all my research, I think this is just a carryover where they used to act a little bit differently, but now in all my experiences, they do the exact same thing as groups. So, just chalk it up to one less thing you have to worry about. So that's it. Those are the things that are really going to help you keep your layer mask straight. So first, just understanding a grayscale selection, how that's represented by a mask, how that controls what shows through and what doesn't show through. And then you have to understand, usually by default, anything below the mask is going to be affected by that mask, but then that can change if it's within a group, if it's a nested layer. And then also clipping masks where you have one object that acts as a parent object. These are all the factors that can change how your mask is behaving. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. If you have anything particular you want to learn, go ahead, type it down below in the comments. I always like to hear from viewers, hear what they want to learn, and I will try to make a video that helps you out. Thanks again. See you soon.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past.